Hey guys, thanks for getting all of your videos posted and kind of working out the kinks with that. I really appreciate you guys that had yours uploaded on by Thursday. Thank you very much. That just helps the rest of us to have some time to learn. I hate to have everybody scrambling on Saturday night and Sunday night to try to get their work done. So thank you so much for having those posted and the work that you did with that. The tool that I downloaded and use to video every week is called Screencast-O-Matic. It's a free download. I'm probably going to ask you to video again here over the next couple of weeks. So hopefully we've got the kinks worked out and we can learn from each other in that way. It's also nice to see each other and who we've been working with and actually kind of have a face with a name. So thank you for doing that. I also appreciated some of your comments and I responded back. So if you haven't looked in last week's discussions, please make sure that you look back there because I have responded to quite a few of your comments and your questions. Also love that you looked at all the Twitter people. It's a great place, and Lupita had some great questions, so check out her post because I responded to the questions that she asked with how I go about having a professional Twitter account and having a personal social media presence too. So I balanced both of those and I posted that under her questions. So please make sure you go back and look at those and what I've responded. This week is my favorite week. So I'm an instructional coach here at Central Decatur, and I have a huge passion for standards, curriculum, and accountability. Three things that I'm probably the most passionate about within education. So I have a lot of new learning for you this week, some different things that I want you to look for and evaluate. And I'm going to go through those right now, and then I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I really want to discuss with you or talk to you about before you read about them in this week's chapter 10. So I have some links here that I want you to look at. Part of accountability and standards is not just student standards and curriculum, is also teacher standards. There are 8 Iowa teaching standards that you will probably use when you go to college, if you go to college here in Iowa. So these 8 teaching standards I have linked. I want you to take a look at these and read these. You will more than likely be asked to create a portfolio. I'm trying to see if I have one here. I think I do. So I don't know if you, okay. So this is my portfolio from college. It's huge. It's all the ways throughout my practicum and my student teaching experiences that I met the 8 Iowa teaching standards, which I have printed. Okay, so most likely you will have to do these. Mine are the Iowa State teaching standards, and they're aligned with the 8 teaching standards. So your college will have identified standards that they expect you to have learned. And then you will show evidence, which we're going to talk about a lot this week with student evidence, or learn a lot about student evidence. You will have to show your evidence of how you met that standard through all of these different artifacts. So be prepared. This is something that you'll probably have to do before you graduate from college. Yours will probably be digital because I went to school and we didn't have, well, we did, but it just wasn't that cool when I was in college. So yours will probably be digital. And then as teachers in Iowa, you have to show evidence of how you're meeting these 8 standards every 3 years. So the state of Iowa is on a 3-year evaluation cycle, and you will update your portfolio and have a meeting with your administrator and share with them how you have met these 8 criteria. So here's the standard and here's the criteria. Similar to student standards that have standards and benchmarks. So the standards for students, which I'm not going to get into a ton of that with you right now, like as far as detailed standards, because my goal with this course is for you to know what standards are and what benchmarks are, not the specific things within each course. So standards for students are the big overarching goal. Underneath each standard, in every content area has a music, art, PE, FCS, social studies, science, math. They all have their own standards that students are expected to meet in each grade level before they graduate, so that we can guarantee that they're college and career ready. They've met these standards, students have. Then there are benchmarks underneath each standard, and benchmarks are things, they're like the checkpoints along the way. They're all the skills and things that students need to know in order to meet this standard. Standards are year-long processes. So it's building up and building up and building up so that at the end of 5th grade, you've shown evidence of mastery of these standards. With standards and what we have, so the Common Core, in Iowa it's called the Iowa Core. The Common Core standards are the same thing as the Iowa Core standards, plus 15%. So when the Common Core standards were passed, all states were allowed to add up to 15%. Iowa chose to do that, and with that, they chose to change the name. So Common Core standards are pretty much what everybody uses. They got a really bad rap in the beginning as far as media-wise and community, but most states use the Common Core standards as a guide to set their own, and they might be called something different. Each state might call it something different, and some states adopted the Common Core. From what you guys are saying, you want to stay here in Iowa, so it's the Iowa Core standards. Some, like music and art, their standards are national standards. So business standards are national standards that we use. The social studies standards are brand new. They just were adopted in this year, 2017. So standards don't stay the same. Science standards were just adopted a couple years ago. The ELA standards, the math standards have been Iowa Core and have been that way since before 2009. In saying that, teachers and school districts are still working and are constantly working on the curriculum that they create to help students meet standards. When I say curriculum, that's the activities, the materials, the lessons, the pedagogy, huge word, I've talked to you about that before. Pedagogy is the way that we teach. So it's the activities, the materials, the lessons, the pedagogy, the ways that we teach, the instructional strategies that we use, and the assessment that help students get to those standards. Curriculum is constantly being revised and thought about and reflected on. You're going to learn a lot about curriculum in the reading in Chapter 10. It's really important. Along with standards is how do you know whether students have met them or not? What evidence are you collecting? Some of you last week commented on testing. I think it was Mackenzie that in one of her comments brought up testing. I challenge you as teachers to not look at testing as a catastrophe, but to look at it as a challenge. And I'm going to connect that back to our reading in our chapter. So there are tests, and I commented on Mackenzie's post, but there are 2 tests that are required of all of our students, the Iowa assessments and the MAP test. The MAP test isn't required. I don't know, here at Central Decatur, that's what we take. A lot of schools in the state of Iowa, that's their second assessment, because the state requires all students to take 2 standardized assessments. It's state required. It's law. So from a student perspective, you might be thinking, like we're tested all the time. Well, from a teacher perspective, that's how I know whether you're learning. And I know that from day to day, from the formative assessments, so that's the day to day, and then the summative assessments, which are your Iowa assessments, MAP tests, things like that, where it's like the end goal. But really think about them as a challenge. And I know there's a lot, it's constantly being evaluated. Is testing too much? Are we not testing enough? Some states test way more than the state of Iowa. So every state has their own, in ESSA, remember we learned about that last week, ESSEA, Every Student Succeeds, ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, gave a lot of roles and responsibilities back to the states. So they get to pick. But testing is something that we contend with as a teacher, as it says on page 354. Think of it as a challenge, not as an unsettling catastrophe. Tests can provide teachers with useful data. You got to look at the data, and you have to use the data. That's what makes tests useful. And I'm going to challenge you to do that. We get all this data, and data's use is useless if we don't use it. So as a teacher, if you're collecting data, use it. Share it with your students. Give them a pre-test and then a post-test. That's one of the best ways that human beings are motivated, is by some success. So if I get a 60 out of 100 on my pre-test and a 90 out of 100 on my post-test, wow, I feel good. That's like in sports. When I have a vertical of 10 inches and I increase it to 12 inches. That's amazing. And I've put in some hard work to do that. So I challenge you to just keep in the back of your minds about pre-tests and post-tests and how am I measuring? how my students are getting to those standards. What evidence am I collecting that's showing that they're meeting those standards? Okay, so you can tell I'm really passionate about this, and I'm running out of time. So I want to talk through other things that I expect you to look through this week. And then I will be really involved in our discussion post this week, and I'm excited for most of the learning to come there. So I want you to take a look at this Marzano evaluation tool and the Danielson framework for teaching. Those are both teacher evaluation tools. So we are held accountable as teachers, as we should be, by parents in the community, our administrators, and I think our peers. We should be held accountable for the work that we do with students. We have important work to do. Our job is really important, and we should be held to a high standard for that. Take a look at both of these. On this one, it's a really big PDF. Scroll down to page 7. It actually shows the framework and how some schools, Des Moines Public is one that uses this, for evaluating teachers. So walkthroughs with instructional coaches will use this and will look for these elements within the lesson and then are able to give feedback. The Danielson one is the same way. Both of these are used in different schools. Some of them are merged together. Schools will merge them and take them and make them their own. But these are also things. So I want you to read through both of those, thinking about, if I'm in a school district and they use one of those, what will I have to do in order to achieve where I want to be? The Iowa teaching standards I already talked to you about. Make sure that you look through those. Those are the expectations for every teacher in Iowa to be meeting those. I want you to watch this video. He is my favorite teacher. He's national board certified, which you're going to read about the criteria for that. But he talks about defining mastery. So Rick Wormley is a huge researcher, used standards-based grading in his classroom, and I want to bring up standards-based grading because this week we're talking about standards, and we're talking about how do we collect evidence on standards. So I want you to listen to Rick Wormley. He is funny, sarcastic, full of energy. If you ever get to see him, I highly recommend it. He's one of my favorites. So to the work that we have to do, tons of learning this week. Looking through these documents, watching this video, reading chapter 10. There's tons of great stuff in chapter 10, and I'm really looking forward to you bringing that up in the discussion post. So after all your learning this week, after all of these things, I want you to share 4 things that you learned. Can be one thing from the book, one thing from the video, one thing from the evaluation tools for teachers, one thing from somewhere else. It can be 2 things from the book and 2 things from the video, but I'd like it if you'd incorporate the multiple resources that I'm providing you with this week to share what you've learned. So I want you to share 4 things that you've learned. And then I want you to share 4 questions that you have. And those 4 questions I'm going to respond to. So as you post, I will be checking. I'll try to check as frequently as possible. I'm on here every day. It just depends on when you post, whether I see what you're doing or not. So all of your posts, please have them posted by Thursday, November 2nd. And then what I want you to do is once you have your 4 things you've learned and the 4 questions that you ask, I'll respond, and then I want you to respond to one of mine with like a, thank you for telling me that, I didn't realize that, this now helps me to understand this. I don't want just a, thanks Mrs. Readout, but I want something like, how does it help you? How is what I'm responding to your questions, how does that help you to then process information and learn how to be an effective teacher and what it takes to be an effective teacher? And then I want to know how many observations you've completed. So up to date, how many do you have done? Post it in here. Accountability. That's what we're practicing. Accountability for ourselves and accountability for peers. How many observation hours do you have done? If you have any questions this week, please let me know. Again, I'm super passionate about this. I'm excited about your questions. I'm excited about the 4 things that you've learned. I hope that you love Rick Wormley. He's my favorite. He's super energetic and somebody that I really look up to. I look forward to hearing all of your learning this week.